Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. You're watching the Muslim Geordie Podcast. Welcome to another episode. We are back this weekend again. Every weekend we're here, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. I'll be here with different guests talking about different topics. Usually topics that no one really wants to talk about, and we're going to unpack. We normally unpack some of those, taboo subjects as well. So I'm sure that tonight isn't going to be any different, inshallah. Yeah. Let me give a shout out to our sponsors before we introduce our guest. HM Residential, Hill Matheson, Brother Zaf, big up to you and your organizations. Thank you for sponsoring our program. Manjaro's restaurant as well, of course, in Newcastle. Manjaro's Newcastle. Make sure that you break your iftar there at least once during this Ramadan. So we're going to go straight into it. Now that we've done all of our intros and shout outs and stuff, let me introduce a good friend of mine, a brother all the way from Toronto, Canada. He's agreed to come on. I'm really grateful that he's come on to have a conversation. He's one of the what I consider the old school brothers, right? So he's one of the brothers who was involved in the Dower from the 90s. He's seen a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, the dramas, and he's got a lot of insight. I think I'm really looking forward to share some of this conversation with. I want to introduce you all to Brother Rasheed Gonzales. Assalamu alaikum, Rasheed.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Good to see you, man. I'm glad you were able to make it to the show.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Yeah, how has your Ramadan been?
It's been pretty good so far. I mean, considering with COVID and all that, they got another lockdown here in Toronto. So, trying to make do with that, and between work and home, family.
Yeah, it's gone quick though, yeah?
Yeah. That was like I mentioned earlier. I was telling my kid, who said, surprised about end of April's already right here, and told him, it's one of the signs of the last day. That time seems to fly by. So, we got to make the most of what we're doing here.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. The last 10 days and the last 10 nights of Ramadan are fast approaching. So
yeah,
give some advice to the viewers on, how we can maximize our time and what we should be focusing on these last 10 nights.
Well, we could do what I did and take the last 10 days of Ramadan off work, use those vacation days so that you can focus, inshallah. And, do whatever you can, read Quran, Salah, dhikr,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing is, when the scholars, they teach us, they say that the hadith that talk about the last 10 nights is to search for Laylatul Qadr. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket that it's going to be on one day and one night only. Search for it. So exert yourself in the last 10 nights,
exactly.
with your ibadah and stuff.
Very
good. Good. All right. So let's talk a little bit about you, bro Rasheed. Yeah, there's quite a few things. Let's start with a little bit about your history. Talk a little bit about your background. Who is Rasheed Gonzales?
Well, I'm a Filipino Canadian convert. I became Muslim in 1999, so I wasn't exactly there in the 90s, just about the end. Alhamdulillah, my younger brother, Ismail, he converted before me about 2 years before, almost to the day. And he started giving me dawah real subtly, like we were born into a Christian family, and I was probably the first from my three brothers to say I wasn't Christian anymore. And I did that because of some of the stuff I saw from the people at the church we were going to. I felt that, the way that they looked towards us, because, I mean, growing from like a urban, background, we weren't exactly the most angelic kids. And a lot of the churchgoers, they looked at us as like little hoodlums and thugs. So, and the stuff that they were preaching about brotherhood and love and all that stuff, we didn't really feel it from the congregation. And I felt that, that among other things didn't make too much sense, So I said, that's it, I'm done with this. So I was agnostic for a long time. And then my brother ended up accepting Islam. in 97. And around 99, I guess I had some issues, I'll say, not without getting too much details. Like anyone who wants to read my story, I've written, like, I guess, autobiography on my blog, which, I mean, it hasn't been active in quite a while, but it's there. So if anyone's interested, they can check that out. Rasheed Gonzales at WordPress. And yeah, so I had a bunch of problems, and my brother took the opportunity to start giving me dawah. And over time, you know, like little things. It wasn't like anything too obvious, I guess. Like he'd ask me little questions, like one of the questions I really remember him asking me was, "What's science?" And me being smart ass, you know, I like, it's the way things work. What are you, stupid? And he's like, wrong. I'm like, what? What do you mean wrong? This is the way. He's like, no, it's the way God makes things work. And I sat there and I was like, yeah, you know what? You got a point there, you know? And he'd ask me little questions like this here and there to drop dawah. And then spring of that year, he decided to, because he's like, the 2 years that he converted, he wasn't really too practicing. And the year that I converted, he decided to get serious about it and start learning and start practicing more. And part of that, he made a plan to take a 3-month trip, 2 months in the Philippines to visit family. And then from there, he was planning to go to make Umrah in Saudi, and then to New York for a conference, an Islamic conference. And so it was during this trip that he went away that I converted. He had told a couple of close friends of ours that we'd grown up with, who had also converted after my brother, to keep an eye on me and to continue with the dawah. Nice. And that's what they did. So they ended up taking me to Shabir Ali's Dawah Center, and I ended up taking my Shahada there in summer of 99.
Were they of Filipino background as well?
Yes, they're all Filipino. All yeah. Filipino Canadians, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, because one thing I've noticed, Filipinos are generally believers in God, if I could say that, you know, from my experiences with
back home, they're really religious, like a lot of strong Catholics back home. So
yeah. And even when I was in Riyadh, there was a lot of Filipino workers there. And when we were giving them dawah, I don't know what it is, but they seem to be very susceptible to Islam. You know, it's very easy for them to understand Islam. I don't know what it is compared to all the other communities that I've worked with and given dawah to. Filipinos seem to be the easiest, you know, the ones who are most susceptible and open to Islam. Why is that? Why do you think that even in Philippines now, you know, the brothers who are doing work there now, they're getting like hundreds of shahadas, villages sometimes, all converting at one time. And why is that? Why do you think that is?
I honestly don't know. I mean, like if you look at Filipino history, which I'm not too, you know, familiar with, I know that Islam was there before Catholicism.
That's right.
So, you know, the traders that came from India and other places, they gave dawah to the people there, especially down in the south, and they converted a lot of the Filipinos. So I mean, and you look at Filipino culture and also the language. There's some Arabic in the main dialect in Tagalog. I don't know about the other dialects.
Right.
There's also a lot of things that in Filipino culture, like that. I don't know if it came from Islam, but you know, they're very similar, right? Like cleaning yourself after going to the washroom, and you know, like respect and honor to your parents and elders. Like there's a lot of good things in Filipino culture that have that might have links to Islam. Like I'm no expert in history and all that stuff, so I can't say for sure.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, even some of the little bits of history that I read, you know, the Muslims, they even helped fight off against the Portuguese when the Portuguese were trying to come there and stuff like that. There's a lot of historical moments where I guess there is a lot of respect, even if the Filipinos aren't Muslim, they still have a lot of respect towards Islam. So I've heard that as well, and I've seen some of read about that also.
Yeah, there's a lot of folklore and stuff about the Moro warriors in the south. I was told, and I haven't really confirmed this, but I remember before Islam, I was told that the U.S. Marines, they got their nickname Leathernecks because of the Moros. And the story goes that the Moros, fighting with their swords and stuff, would go for the neck. And to protect themselves from getting their heads chopped off, they started wearing leather necklaces, like leather bracelets around their neck to protect them from the swords. I don't know if it's true, but
Okay,
I'm also told that the 45 round caliber round was developed because of the Moros too.
Okay, really?
From what I've heard, yeah. Again, Allah knows best.
Why do you think that the Dower is quite open towards Filipinos? What do you think the reason for that is, though?
Well, like you said, a lot of religious,
the culture. What is
they're
it?
Religious people to begin with, right? So, I guess it depends. Like with everybody, if they're sincere and they're honest, like if they hear the truth, you can't really do anything other than accept it. So
yeah,
I think that not so much with Filipinos in specific, but like anybody, right? And because Filipinos are generally, like you said, very religious, they have that tie to God already. And if they're shown the truth about Allah and His prophets and His revelations, they'll start to see and link dots and come to the conclusions. So, I'm not a very big. I consider my culture primarily Canadian. I'm not a big guy into Filipino culture.
Okay.
It's the way I was raised. So, like my wife is a lot more into Filipino culture. My wife is a Filipino convert as well from the UK.
Okay.
And she speaks the language as well. So her parents did a good job of keeping that. Whereas my parents believed my teachers when they told them to speak to me in English only. So I can understand my native tongue, but I can't speak it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your Canadian side then. Let's talk a little bit about Canada. So you were born and raised in Canada. What was it like? What was it like being a Canadian Filipino there? And from converting, how was the experience? Your friends, your family, what was their response? And what's your advice to? Because it's interesting, something I picked up on. You said that your brother gave sort of subtle Dower, right? Just questions here and there. What's your advice on Dower in general in terms of how people are giving Dower today? What's good in the way that they give Dower to non-Muslims, and what's not so good from your experiences? So let's talk a little bit about your background and your upbringing as well.
My background, like you mentioned, I was born and raised here in Toronto. The area that we lived in when I was young was a pretty diverse community. It's right now, if you go, it's mainly Indo-Pak, mainly largely Gujarati, if I'm not mistaken, Thorncliffe Park. So back when I was growing up, it was a lot of Greeks, a lot of whites, a lot of Jamaicans, a lot of Filipinos, a lot of Indians and Pakistanis. So like I grew up, pretty multicultural. If you looked at my class photos from when I was younger, you'll see a lot of different colors. And I didn't really start hanging around Filipinos until high school days. Okay. And that's when I started getting more into that, like aware of race and stuff like that. And, like I had a lot of Muslim friends growing up, but I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know they were Muslim. I just knew they, they're brown skin and whatnot. So that's pretty much my upbringing. That's why I mentioned about the thing. I'm not too big into Filipino culture. My interaction with Filipinos as you know, before high school, it was mainly just family, cousins and stuff like that, family friends, or people that lived in my building or in neighboring buildings in the area. But again, like we were in a multicultural setting, so you know, we all had like friends from different ethnicities and nationalities and stuff. In terms of dawah, like I mentioned, my brother was real subtle. Um, there's a, I mean, with dawah, it's pretty tricky because you have to know your audience, your target, right? You gotta try and figure out what will work because not everything, not you know, it's not a one shoe fits all type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, like a lot of things we're seeing today in terms of dawah, like I can't help but face palm and cringe at some of the stuff going on because it's a bit too forward sometimes and without hikmah, without any wisdom. And the wisdom is the most important thing with dawah because you might be doing a lot of harm, you know, being too aggressive with your dawah. And that's one thing that me and my brother found with our family, right? With some members of our family that, like my parents and whatnot, we're a bit too aggressive and too like staunch on certain things, like wearing a thobe and a ghutra and the shemagh and all that stuff. And you know, my dad, he didn't like it right away. My mom stopped speaking to me for a couple of weeks when she found out I converted.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was upset. She told me that she failed as a mother.
Subhanallah.
Which broke my heart because I feel that she actually did a great job at raising me and my brothers, considering, you know, like we got into trouble, but we knew people that got into a lot worse trouble, right? So considering where we could have been and, you know, what actually happened with us, I think my parents did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And a lot of the values that they helped instill in us, I still have now. Respect towards women and your parents and importance of family, stuff like that, like the importance of honesty and integrity. Like I got that from my parents, and it got reinforced by what I learned in Islam, you know. So what she told me, you know, she couldn't have been more wrong. Like in part, you know, her raising me helped lead me to Islam.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, like I was saying, we're a bit too staunch in certain things, a little bit too inflexible, and we caused a lot of damage. And you know, I feel that my dad, though he loved us because we were his children, he kind of, you know, he had a lot of dislike for what we became, you know, like and practicing Muslims and stuff. And him and my brother used to clash quite a bit over certain things. And you know, and he ended up passing away. What was it, 5 years ago or so? I don't remember now. It's quite a while ago, but I mean, and you know, the time before his passing was mainly trying to fix the damage we did.
Yeah.
You know, and that you know, if we had done things differently, that time that we spent trying to fix things could have been spent, you know, trying to give better dawah. So, like with me, one of the things is I try and keep to is to have no regrets, and that every slip and every mistake you make, it leads you to where you are. Anything you did in the past led to where you are now, and anything you're gonna do is gonna lead to where you're gonna be. And the only thing you can do is to learn from it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, alhamdulillah, like, you know, things happened the way they did, and we are where we are now. And it's helping me as a parent in you know, showing my kids, you know, you see that, don't do that, don't be like this guy, don't be an idiot, you know. And alhamdulillah, I think me and my wife are doing a pretty decent job with our kids, and they got
Allah.
pretty good heads on their shoulders, you know,
Mhm.
and they see things that we see, like when people are being a bit too forward with their dawah, unwise, you know, boneheaded, if you want to call it that. They see them. They see these things and they can point them out. You know, like, oh, that was just dumb. Why did they do that?
Mm.
You know.
I think. Do you think there's a balance that has to be had here? Because on the one hand, I can totally relate to what you're saying because you'll find a lot of converts to or not a lot, some converts to Islam, some who came back to Islam like me in our teenage years.
Hmm.
We have that overzealous sort of period, right, where
Yeah.
everything's black and white, and you want to ram it down people's throats, and and on the back of your mind, you want your family to really be, you know, practicing Islam and come to Islam, and sometimes you go overboard with that, and it actually ends up pushing them away rather than bringing them back. I think quite a few people go through that sort of
Yeah,
phase, if you
exactly.
like. And then on the other hand, you've got, like you mentioned earlier on, you were brought up with Muslims in your community, but you had no idea what Islam was. They were maybe too shy to talk about it, or didn't want to make it public, and went to the other extreme of almost hiding their Islam, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be some sort of balance, don't you think,
Oh,
between
of
the
course,
two?
of course. Like in everything in life, there's got to
Mm.
be a balance, right? You can't
Yeah,
be too extreme one way or the other, and that's the trick with everything, whether it be dawah or your family life, your work life.
yeah,
It's always striving to find that even keel, right? That balance point where you're not too much this way, you're not too much that way, and like I said earlier about dawah requiring wisdom, that's part of it, and knowing when you can start being a little bit more aggressive or when you need to start to lay back a bit.
mm.
You gotta keep an eye on what you're saying and what you're doing, how the people are reacting to it, and engage accordingly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We've got a question here.
Hmm.
Um, Rashid, what makes you cringe about the Dower now? That's an interesting question. Let's break that down a little bit.
Oh, where to start? It's that's a pretty big question. I
Well,
mean,
let's start off with, let's look at from your experiences. So you've got, for example, your brother who gave a particular type of dawah to you.
mhm,
You and your brother, or your brother gave a particular type of dawah to your father, which had an adverse reaction to that. You've seen in your community people who shy away from giving dawah altogether. Then
mhm.
you mentioned about those who are a bit too direct and too forward and cringe, as you put it, um, who, and even your kids can notice it when they see that. Why did they do it like that? Where's the hikmah, where's the wisdom behind talking about certain things or doing certain things? Let's open that up a little bit.
Mhm. Well, I mean, there's so much going on right now, and so many like different aspects about society. Certain trends and stuff. Like right now, a big thing is cancel culture,
Hmm.
right? Where any little mistake a person makes, or like even not even a mistake, but something that others perceive to be a mistake, but might not be. And then people start, going up in arms, like, "Oh my God, how can he say this? Astaghfirullah! This he's off it now. He's deviant. He's blah blah blah." And then
Hmm.
all this outrage happens, and they try and cancel the person. Whereas, like, and this person could have had a lot of contributions to the Dawah prior to that. A lot of good work that they've done, and because they're going a certain way that people don't necessarily like, all of a sudden that's all forgotten and cast aside. Where and then he's judged accordingly, and we see it a
Hmm.
lot with different personalities in the Dawah, right? Western speakers, Eastern speakers, and stuff like that, or like things that uh, the there's one incident that I remember hearing about. I didn't follow it too closely, but involving knitting and the
Knitting.
whole thing, the whole thing with
Oh
Sheikh
yeah. I
Mufti.
saw that. I saw that.
Yeah, yeah, and then the whole thing about masculinity, and and these ideas, like it's just I don't know. It's just like people making mountains out of molehills.
Hmm.
Like, so what if he knit? Who cares? Like, what? And what's so feminine about it?
Yeah.
Like the Prophet ﷺ used to sew his clothes, and sewing is viewed here in the West, especially as a feminine occupation. Like, are you gonna say that the Prophet ﷺ was feminine? A'udhu
Of
billah.
course not. Yeah.
So it's like people need to relax, people need to chill, and not jump on every little thing. Like, like, so what? Let them do their dawah. Like, as if he's having a good effect or having a positive effect on people, then just let him be.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's That's an interesting point there. And the interesting thing is, many of our teachers don't behave like that. Many of our scholars don't behave like that. So
No.
the way that things that's being portrayed is, it's actually quite far from the teachings the tarbiyah that we were given as well. Actually, now when you started practicing the Deen, it's interesting. Because I'm not sure about the gap. I've got a bit of gap in between from when you started practicing to when you started translating Arabic works and having your blog post. What got you down that route in the first place? Because obviously you studied Arabic at some point to be able to translate.
In terms of Arabic, I'm pretty much self-studied.
Okay.
And I got started early on, alhamdulillah. Okay, so where do I start? So after I converted, like I said, my brother was away, and I actually converted on the first part of his trip while he was in the Philippines. So that was in the first month of his trip, and he was supposed to be gone for, I think, was it 2 months or either 2 or 3, I forget. But I know that wait, was it? I'm pretty well. Anyways, when he came back, his first word of advice to me was that I was gonna see a lot of stuff about different groups. Sunni, Shia, Tablighi, Sufi, blah blah blah. And he said, you might start getting a bit confused about stuff. And he said, if you're gonna learn from anybody, learn from the Salafis, right? And that was his word of advice to me. And I said, okay, fine, And alhamdulillah, one of my dearest friends was a neighbor of mine. He lived above me and in the building. He's one of the brothers. At the time, I didn't know he was part of QSS, the Quran Society.
Okay.
And another brother that's currently living in Saudi. His name is Nail. I met him before I converted. I met him at my friend's wedding, right? Who had converted. So, like I mentioned, there were 2 friends that had converted along with my brother. The 2 Filipinos, brother Idris and his wife, who recently passed away, rahimahullah. They had Idris had invited a friend that he had just met, and there's a Eritrean Egyptian brother who spoke my language.
Okay.
He spoke Tagalog, so him and this my neighbor Omar were both part of QSS, and I didn't know that. So after converting, I became friends with them, and I hung around them quite a bit. And early on, I got involved with QSS from very, very early, and like the importance. One of the things about Salafi Dawah is always about seeking knowledge, gaining knowledge, learning. So I got encouraged to start learning Arabic. So I got my hands on the Medina books. I went through them myself. I did the first 2 books. I started the third, but I didn't finish it, and I still haven't finished it to this day. Um, but so I started learning the alphabet, learning how to pronounce the letters, um, going through the books, like I said, and then translating things on my own, just to as a means of gaining vocab, mainly. So friends would send me posts from various Arabic forums or quotes from different books, and I would translate those for myself,
Okay,
and that's how
mashallah.
I got into that.
Yeah.
Um, and then a few years after, like I'd say around 2005, 2006, a friend of mine encouraged me to start the blog. So that's when that started. And
Right. Okay. We've got a comment from our brother Ali Hassan. May
mhm.
Allah reward Ustad Rasheed for all his articles against Hadadiyah and extreme in Tabdi groups. Yeah. So your blog was actually really powerful. Actually, I do remember. That's how I got introduced to
Alhamdulillah.
you because of your blog. The
Mhm.
articles that were on there were amazing. It was so wide and comprehensive. It's a shame you stopped actually because there were a lot of stuff which was relevant, which was, the content was good. It
Mhm.
was translated works which we couldn't get our
Jazakumullahu
hands
khairan.
on. There was a lot of things that I benefited from personally, and that's where we became sort of virtual friends. And then the first time I met you in person was at Kufi's house when I dropped you off when you
Yeah,
were in
yeah,
London,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it. I remember that night perfect.
Yeah. Then that's the first time I met you in person. And I think you were working on a project with the brother and translating some stuff. That's why you were at his house. And I happened
Actually,
to
I
be
was
in
just there
London.
hanging out because I was
Okay.
visiting family in London, and it was my second trip there. It was 2008, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that most of that trip I was hanging out with Abdul Haq. We were
That's right.
hooking up here and there. I met a lot of brothers actually. I met some pretty good friends. You, brother Shad from Aylesbury,
Yeah.
Hassan al-Turki, whole bunch of guys
Mhm.
from the UK. I thought actually no, I met the brothers in Luton on my first trip in 2005. But yeah, I met quite a nice few nice brothers in the
MashaAllah.
UK in my visits there.
Because you basically, one of the things that I remember, one article that you wrote on your blog was about the Arabic language and learning Arabic.
Yeah,
And you
that was
broke
my post on learning it on your own.
exactly, yeah. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you broke it up into two parts. One was if you want to learn Arabic for reading and writing, or reading basically, and then
hmm
there's one if you want to speak.
yeah, yeah.
There's a different approach you have to take for both basically.
Of course, yes.
Do you remember that article? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I do.
What's the advice that you give the viewers for those who want to learn Arabic? What's your advice to them?
Well, like I said in the article, first and foremost, your intention, why you're doing it. Because if you're doing it for Allah and also like to better yourself in your understanding of the religion, Allah's going to help you because of the reason you're doing it, right? To
Yeah.
understand His words and His words of His Prophet. Um, After that, you you need to come to a decision on what your actual goal is. If you want to be able to converse, like you said, and communicate, or just to read for yourself, right? And for me, it was just to read. I wasn't too interested in having deep conversations with people and flexing my Arabic skills. Mainly, it was just so that I could read and translate. So the goal for each is like, I mean, the aims for each is going to be a bit different.
Mm.
Obviously, for both, you're going to need to learn grammar and stuff. But then with conversing, um, you're going to need a lot more immersive things to like. One of my friends, what he did was he made a deal with his neighbor who was Egyptian that they would only converse with each other in Arabic, and that if my friend answered him in English, that he would be ignored.
Right. Okay.
So it forced him to use what he knew, and he began he gained the not I'll say like a good amount of fluency, but he became pretty fluent pretty quickly, right?
Okay.
So you have to be immersed in it. And if you're in a country in the West like here where Arabic isn't spoken very much, you're gonna have to come up with things like that. You know, if you're in an Arabic country, it's a little bit easy. It's a lot easier because everyone's speaking Arabic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so for me, because I wanted to read, you know, like I didn't have to worry about that too much. For me, it was just accumulating vocab, getting familiar with figuring out the root words and the forms and stuff like that, and also becoming best friends with the dictionary.
Inshallah.
You know,
Yeah,
so
alhamdulillah. I think that's some good advice there, actually. And depending on the person, what they want, like you said, it's the intention. What they want to get out of Arabic is the route and approach that they're gonna go down. We've got quite a few comments coming up here. So just based upon what you were saying, Muslim BB, he says, Brother Rasheed, I understand what you mean by cancel culture, but don't you think we need people to call out others if need be? It can cause people to be misguided otherwise.
of course, but there's a way to do it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that, alhamdulillah, I was very blessed and fortunate to have was one of my translations was published. And it was a book written by Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad entitled Rifqan Ahl Sunnah bi Ahl Sunnah. It translates to gentleness or Ahl Sunnah with Ahl Sunnah. So basically be gentle with each other. And this book, I translated it and published it. It was mainly about a fitna that happened. It started in, I think, 2000, 2001. Maybe you remember better.
I remember, yeah.
Sheikh Abul Hassan al-Ma'ribi.
2000, yeah.
Yeah, that's when it first started to make waves, and it blew up by 2002, 2003.
I think it started before that, but it was building up, wasn't it? And then it
really exactly
2000, 2001.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, Sheikh Abul Hassan al-Ma'ribi is an Egyptian sheikh who resides in Yemen. And he was one of the premier students of Sheikh Muqbil bin Hadi al-Wadi'i. And what had happened with him was a bunch of his colleagues and fellow students of Sheikh Muqbil basically tag teamed against him to get him thrown off because they didn't like him too much. And a lot of it was based off of personal beefs. And Sheikh Rabi bin Hadi al-Madkhali from Saudi got involved, and he was the main, I guess, antagonist of the story. And so there was a lot of fighting back and forth, words thrown, articles and books written back and forth between Sheikh Abul Hassan and Sheikh Rabi'. And various scholars from around the world started taking sides, and same thing, writing back and forth. And by the time Sheikh Abdul Muhsin wrote his book, it was basically telling everybody to chill out, and you guys need to have mercy with one another. And he was one of the sheikhs that mentioned that this beef was largely personal, and that it didn't have any real religious
grounding.
Any grounding. So it wasn't something that was a true cause for people to be up in arms and say, so and so is a deviant or whatever. And he mentioned in the book that yes, we correct mistakes, but sorry, but the manner in which we correct them matters, And it's quite funny because one of the principles that Sheikh Abul Hassan got accused of innovating was we correct but we don't destroy. And that was actually an article that he had written, I was working on. I got about half of it translated before I stopped. where he mentions, he quotes from a lot of scholars from the past about this, about correcting people's mistakes, but without doing so without destroying the person's reputation
And credibility. Yeah,
and his
absolutely.
credibility, right? And that's one of the things that we see that a lot of people don't do today, right? Where they attack and they not only criticize the mistake that was made, but they criticize the person who made it.
Yeah.
You know, and they try and ruin the reputation of the person, and like you said, like it's cancel culture, right? Where, you know, like say, without mentioning any names, like a particular sheikh known to be an upright and you know, a sheikh upon the truth for the most part, giving dawah for 20, 30 years, you know, and all of a sudden he says one thing that people don't agree with, and that 20, 30 years worth of dawah is thrown in the garbage. You know, like
Exactly.
it's totally forgotten, which is nuts, because those things that he did in the past, they could be the things that grant him Jannah.
Yeah.
You don't know that, right? And that one little mistake that he made yesterday or last week or whatever might not even be considered by Allah because of all the good that he's done previously. You know? And this whole thing about destroying people because of, you know, little mistakes they have here or there, or, you know, like because you don't agree with them on certain things. You know, it's
well, the sad thing is, especially when it's like when it becomes personal beef, and how crazy is it? You were talking earlier, you know, the scholars that were back and forth, and then it turned out that there was personal beef and issues between them and personality, you know, differences. But the crazy thing is, for me, these things that are going on a scholarly level, which is fine because they're going to be trying to correct each other and do what needs to be done. But then it seeps over to the UK, where you're forced to take a position as a layperson, and it's got nothing to do with anything, right?
Exactly.
What on earth are you talking about? Why do I have to make a position here or there? It doesn't affect me either way. It genuinely doesn't in my everyday life. It does not affect me in any way, shape, or form. I'm still going to benefit from the knowledge, you know, the good that comes, regardless whether you like that person or don't like him. I'm still going to benefit from the knowledge, right? Exactly. And I think there's another. So that's one aspect which I've never got my head around. You know, let the scholars deal with what they need to deal with. It's not something that you as a layperson or even a student of knowledge has to get involved with. What is that all about?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like, you know, like early 2000s, like I said, this whole controversy with Sheikh Abul Hassan. You know, people were asking, what is your view on Abul Hassan al-Ma'ribi? And a lot of the time, the people they were asking had no idea who this person was. You know, like, I'm going to have a position on someone I don't even know. I don't read from. I've never heard of him before. You know, like, you have to have a position. What, you know, Sheikh Rabi'a said this. It's like, dude, relax. I don't know nothing about this. You know, and a lot of us got tested by that.
It was honestly, there was some big trials and tribulations from that for the brothers who would just want to develop themselves and keep moving it forward. But there's some more comments here. There's one from Merciful Servant I think is interesting. Do you think Muslims thrive off controversy? Why does it happen? I mean, personally, for me, I think a lot of it's egos. You know, a lot of it's egos.
Partially.
Get in the way.
I mean, I think humans in general are attracted to controversy and to just, like, I don't know, unfortunate things. I suppose we'll call them that. Like, I mean, you see it all the time. Like, you're driving down the highway, there's a crash, everybody slows down to look, you know, to see what happened. And it's the part of that whole, you know, human curiosity to see what's going on, and I think that's part of it, you know. And then also, like you said, ego, right? Like, yeah, I know what's going on. I know about this. I know about that. And
but I mean, even gets to extremes of, like, you know, judging intentions, right? So it's like, oh yeah, he said this, but he didn't mean that. Actually, he doesn't know. You know, he's a specialist in this area. This scholar, this sheikh is a specialist in this area. He doesn't know about manhaj affairs and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Come on, man. This is, I don't know. I think it goes a bit too far in many cases with the way that people go about correcting, others, and this cancel culture, like you mentioned. I think that people go to extremes sometimes when it comes to this.
Very much so. I mean, a lot of it also has to do with ignorance too, right? Like, there's one fairly recent controversy that I came across regarding the preservation of the Quran, right? And the sheikh had some words about it, and people took those words the wrong way. They didn't understand what he was trying to say. And if they had actually read the literature on the topic, they'd know that he was very close to being right, if not right, outright.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say about that is the way in which it was done and the platform which it was done on.
Yeah,
that's very wise. There wasn't much hikmah in that, in the way that it was, presented, I guess. If you're going to talk about it like that.
Very true. But I mean, like, he was kind of pressured into giving the answer that he gave because the brother kept pressing. Which I, if I'm not mistaken, he apologized for. But like I said, like, regardless of the way that the topic is raised and how it's presented to the people, like I said, like, people need to relax. They need to chill a bit because they're responding in ways that are not only not befitting, but also fueled by ignorance. Right? They haven't read enough on the topic to know what the true reality is of the situation, and there's so much, like, in the literature, like I said, like, that indicate that what his take on it is the right take, and I did some reading on my own just to see, and there's a lot of examples, like, regarding the different qira'at and the parts of the Quran that were not preserved as Quran, right? We only have mention of these parts in narrations from the companions and stuff, that they used to recite this verse in this way, and they used to recite this verse in that way. And, the same companions are saying that they learned it directly from the Prophet ﷺ. But we don't find these recitations in the Mus'haf, right? So what's the explanation for that? People got to be a little bit more critical in their thinking and not just regurgitate what they've been told, by so-and-so or so-and-so.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too much into the controversy, I think the issue is, the impact it has on explaining things, talking about things without explaining it properly.
Of course.
With the whole preservation of the Quran, we know the Quran is preserved. We know that Allah promises and mentions that the Quran is preserved, and it's clear cut on that. I don't think any Muslim, even those who were talking about it from that particular conversation, dispute that, right?
Yes.
And I think the issue is, the time and place on how you talk about things and when you talk about things.
Of course.
I think that's the main issue here for me. And who's talking about it as well. It's not, some things are just not for the masses because it will get misconstrued, taken out of context. And even in that issue, even non-Muslims, enemies of Islam, haters of Islam, were using statements to try and discredit Islam as well. So I
saw a whole bunch of stuff on YouTube with that.
Yeah, so I think it's very dangerous to push certain ideas without clear guidelines and full explanations.
Yeah,
you don't have to answer every question, Rasheed. Why do you have to? Even if you're pressed, why does anyone have to answer any question if you're not going to give the due justice to such an important topic like that as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there is a level of responsibility that people have in order to clarify the full picture rather than just give a snapshot on the spot, right? Because that's what opens the doors for fitna, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah. So there's another comment here from Merciful Servant, which is, why are Salafis so synonymous with refutations and the cancel culture you talk about? That's an interesting one.
It is very interesting.
Give your take on that, bro. I think this is an important one.
I think a lot of the Salafi brothers, especially the ones involved in online dawah, they take it upon themselves to, like, I mean, the two groups that we're really familiar with, the two quote unquote madkhali groups, they took it upon themselves to be, they've actually, people have called them, or they themselves have called themselves the vanguards of the dawah in the West, right? So they've put it upon themselves to be the protectors of the dawah, and anything that they feel encroaches upon, the sanctity of our call, they'll come to its defense. So I think that's one of the things that they got carried away with, refuting this and that, and you see, like, they started refuting each other.
Yeah.
Cannibalizing themselves, and that's the thing. They changed their focus from teaching and raising and cultivating to, to trying to defend against a lot of things that didn't really need to be defended against. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about something earlier on as well. I mean, it's not just some of the more extreme elements, if you like, or the ones who aren't so balanced within Salafiyah. Even some of the brothers who claim to be balanced, the youth today. I mean, we know the mistakes that we made in the 90s. We know that, right? Some of the older brothers and the du'at and who were involved in dawah back in the 90s, who were older than me. But the way that I look at it is, in the 90s, the dawah was very new. The late 80s, the 90s, the dawah in the UK was very new. In particular, there was no mentors as such, and it was a very new landscape when the dawah was being pushed in a certain way, right? And yes, it got hijacked. Yes, it got taken into a direction which, it didn't do any justice. It did a huge disservice for what the dawah was all about. But then you fast forward 20 years, 25 years, right? You've still got some of the young brothers who are making the same mistakes as the brothers were in the 90s. But the sad thing is, they're not taking the advice and the lessons from those older brothers who went through that whole thing. That's the sad thing for me. Why do you think that is, though?
Well, like I mentioned earlier before we started the live broadcast, ignorance of history, right?
Yeah.
Ignorance of what happened and what transpired, why things happened and why they transpired the way they did. And if you don't know history, you're not going to learn from those mistakes that were made, right? And like you said, everything comes full circle, and we find people making the same mistakes today as they did yesterday, and it's because of that ignorance. They don't know the history of what went down and what happened, and they just know names here and names there, and and then
I think that's why, with regards to that, I think that's why our brother Abdul Haq Baker, he's done an excellent sort of volume, or numerous volumes, on the chronicles of UK Salafi Dawah.
Yeah, I listened to those podcasts. They're pretty good, mashallah.
They're very good. I found them very good. It gives you like a step-by-step, update on the different stages and transitions of how the Dawah went from, from what it really stood for, and then how it got sort of hijacked and changed, and so I think that those who are involved in the Dawah in that perspective, they really need to listen to those volumes, the YouTube videos, because he's chronicled it very, very well, I would say.
Yeah,
I think it's the only thing of its type, isn't it? I don't think anybody else has done anything to that extent, anyway.
There were attempts prior. I think there was one brother that wrote his. Was it Omar Lee? I don't know if you remember.
Oh yeah,
years back, where he wrote his perspective of the
rise and fall.
Yeah, I mean,
he did it on his blog, didn't he?
Yeah, and you'll find other people giving their experiences too. But one thing is that the people got to keep in mind is that these are their personal experiences.
Yeah.
and it's not going to be the same for everybody, right?
Yeah. No, I agree.
But there are certain. Oh, is that everything right? Yeah, certain milestones that people need to keep aware of, right? And some of these things have been documented. There are articles and books out about these things that are available for people to check and see what happened. You know, like
Yeah.
Rifqan al Sunnah, like you said, is out there, and I've heard from some brothers, even fairly recently, that like that work has benefited them quite a bit and opened their eyes to the reality of the situation. And one brother messaged me and told me it was a paradigm shift for him. Alhamdulillah, and it's comforting to know that the work that you do has some positive effects. So alhamdulillah.
Absolutely, bro. You need to get back onto that blog and start translating again. Yeah? That's what you need to do.
We'll see,
I mean, look at this. Check this out. One of the comments, Ali Hassan, he says, Ustad, please try to complete the article we advise and don't destroy. Bro, there's a need for it, man. There's something that is definitely there.
That's debatable. But I mean, we'll see. Inshallah. We'll see.
There's some more comments here. I think the whole thing, Muslim BB says, the whole thing with Mufti Menk and the knitting stuff could have been easy dealt with if they just called each other up, and spoke directly. That could have sorted that out.
Maybe. But I think there's some other problems with that too, like this concept of what masculinity is and femininity and these things about activities and where each activity falls under, like these concepts and stuff. Some of them are foreign to Islam and they're being pushed as, like this is the Islamic view on gender roles and, it's got no basis.
Right. Okay. But I think the point that the brother's trying to make is there would have been a lot less drama, possibly.
Oh, for sure.
By doing that.
For sure.
Yeah, because the Dower dramas, they're getting a bit too many and a bit too consistent.
Oh yeah,
that's the problem.
Like I said, people watch, right? That's what gets all the clicks and the views.
It's entertainment, bro. What can we say?
Yeah.
There's some more comments. I'm just going to quickly read through some of these. There's some quite good ones here. Ismail Al-Buzidi says, Mufti Menk is not a scholar, far from a scholar. A scholar in Islam from this era are, for example, Ibn Uthaymeen, Sheikh Fawzan, Al-Albani, rahimahullah, that sort of thing, he says that Mufti Menk is a da'i. I mean,
Allah understand. This is another problem that a lot of people have. They don't know what knowledge is. They don't know what qualifies someone as a scholar and what doesn't. And I know a lot of people make light of certificates and degrees and stuff, but those things mean something, And if shuyukh are actually regarding these graduates as shuyukh, then who are you to say otherwise? One of my friends graduated from Medina, and Sheikh Abdul Muhsin's son, Sheikh Abdul Razak, called him Sheikh. So who are you to say he's not a Sheikh? When a Sheikh is recognizing him as a Sheikh. And the same thing with brother Sheikh Yasser Qadi. Like, okay, he got a PhD from a Western university, but it's still a PhD in Islamic studies. You can't deny that. And it's his qualifications are a lot higher than some of the shuyukh that some of these guys are considering to be shuyukh. Like, you got to know what knowledge is, and you got to recognize who has it, regardless if you agree with them or not. And it's funny. One of the things that occurred, and I posted about this on my blog a few years back. Our friend Abu Usama al-Zahabi, he was criticized by some brothers for calling Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi a Sheikh. And regardless of what you think of Sheikh Yusuf, al-Qaradawi is a Sheikh, and he's a really big one. You can't say he's not. Our own shuyukh considered him a Sheikh and a scholar. Like, who are you to say he's not? you know, and that title doesn't mean that you're a good one or a bad one, you know. Just like a Muslim could be a good Muslim or a bad Muslim, you can have a good scholar and you can have a bad scholar. But the fact is that they're scholars, whether you agree with them or not on their opinions, and you know, see that question, how would I define
How
a
would you
scholar? A
define what a
scholar is
scholar
someone
is?
who studied the required amount to become one. You know, and if you've spent 10, 15 years in a university to get whatever degree, you're a scholar. You might not be a very good one, but you're still a scholar. You know, you might be a great one. It all depends
There's a number
on
of
the work that you
conditions.
do.
There's a number of conditions that you can apply to see if somebody's a scholar or not. I think Ismail al-Buziri, this is some of the things that he's mentioning. If you look at some of his comments, he's saying he has to fear Allah, knowledge, understand Arabic, so you can understand the Sunnah and the early scholars.
How do you know if someone fears Allah though? That only Allah knows that.
Only Allah knows that. And then
And
he
we
says
have
in
that
another
hadith
comment,
that mentions one of the first people to go to hell is the alim who learned just to show off, right? So how do you know? Someone's taqwa that's between him and Allah. You have no right to judge that.
But I think there's some more comments that he puts on there. He knows things when it's revealed and when it's revealed and so on and so forth. And knows a great part of it and refers to the first, then refers to the scholars and knowledge of fiqh. Only those, and then he gives an ayah from the Quran. I think what Ismail's trying to say is that you can distinguish between, and I think I agree with this as well, you can distinguish between the scholars of the Sunnah and scholars in general, if you like, right? So you can make a distinction between that. And yeah, people who study, people who get, you know, spend whatever amount of time that they spend seeking knowledge, they're scholars. They're scholars in Islam. Whether we agree with them or not on certain viewpoints, fiqh points, even aqidah points, doesn't negate that they're a scholar or not. You could have scholars from the Shiite, for example. They're scholars, especially in their particular fields. But do we agree with them? Probably not. Do we agree with many of the scholars that you mentioned? Even Dr. Yasir Qadi, I don't agree with him on many things. That's for sure. I probably wouldn't consider him a scholar as such, but certainly a student of knowledge, that's for sure. But the point is, there's categorization, I guess, is what the brother's trying to mention here. There's categorization of scholar, how big or small the scholar is, student of knowledge, how big or small they are, the type of scholar, the type of student of knowledge, which sort of specialities they fall into, and things like that. Yeah. Does that make sense? I think that's what the brother's trying to say.
Perhaps.
We'll show some hustle then
my
to the
point
brother
is,
here.
like, if you've studied, right, you deserve to be called what you've studied to be. Right. So, like I said, like, and you mentioned yourself, there are scholars amongst Ahlul Bid'ah, and they're still scholars. They still have knowledge. You know, like they might have wrong viewpoints and wrong opinions on certain things, but they still have that knowledge. They don't not stop becoming scholars because they're not on the Sunnah anymore. This is my point. You know, like, you have to know knowledge, you have to have a recognition of who has it, and you have to respect it.
And there's another comment here by Jerry. Scholar depends on their understanding of Al-Quran and Sunnah. I think you argued against that earlier on.
Well, I mean, this is one of the problems that, you know, have been plaguing our Dower from pretty much when I became Muslim. You know, not knowing these things, not recognizing them.
I think Merciful Servant makes a good point here, just exactly to follow on from what you just said there. Salafis are often seen as harsh too, but as I understand it, this is not the way it should be. Yeah, so it shouldn't be like that.
But
Salafis
everything has its
have a
place,
bad
right?
reputation.
Everything has its place, and that's the thing. Like, people don't know when to be harsh and when not to be.
Exactly.
You know,
it has its place. Yeah. So there's a time to be harsh and there's a time to be soft. There's a time to be direct, and there's a time to be indirect. Yeah, so it's putting things in its right place, and I guess that's what hikmah is, isn't it? Hikmah is that wisdom is putting things in its right place when it needs to be. Yeah, so saying the right things at the right time, essentially, and that's essentially what hikmah is. So I think there is some truth that some Salafis, they don't have very much hikmah when it comes to these things. But I don't think we could say all. And I think there are some very balanced Salafis out there as well who are not so harsh, right? So I think there's a balance to be had there.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, there's a good handful of brothers that I have off the top of my head that I consider very balanced, very wise.
Yeah, sure. Who are they? Who do you trust in that sense?
Well, I mean, we have a very good friend, Abu Usama al-Dhahabi. I've known him for several years. We're very good friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a brother that's here now in Toronto. He used to be there in the UK with you guys, Mu'tasim.
Oh yeah, mashallah.
He's a very beautiful brother.
Give my salams to him. I haven't seen him in
I haven't seen him in quite a while either. I'm quite shy to reach out because I haven't seen him in so long. But
he's what his manners are so beautiful, right? Apart from his recitation is next level, right?
Oh, mashallah.
Recitation, it melts your heart, honestly. When you pray behind him, Tarawih behind him, it melts your heart. Trust me, yeah. But may Allah preserve him. He's a beautiful brother. But his manners is what stuck out for me with him.
Yeah,
his manners.
He's another.
Totally opposed this comment that most of our servants said about Muslims being harsh. This brother ain't harsh, He's not harsh.
He's one of a kind, mashallah.
He is, mashallah. He's very, very good like that. Yeah. Who else? Who else did you say you're gonna that you find a more balance from those?
Your brother Abdurrahim.
Yeah, man.
Sheikh Abdurrahim Green. And there's others too that don't exactly identify as Salafi anymore that I know. I don't want to mention names, but fairly balanced brothers. Some of them are a little bit snarky, a little bit too sarcastic for people's likings, but at the end of the day, they've got good heads on their shoulders, and you have to be willing to have an open mind, and I don't mean so open that you let everything in, but I mean you gotta be critical about the stuff you hear, even if it's coming from your camp.
Yeah, yeah.
And Islam isn't restricted in the sense that there's, unless it's been clearly revealed that there's one true path. By definition we know there is only going to be one truth, but determining what that truth is dependent on the information available to us. Right? And sometimes you just can't determine what is the real truth. So as long as everything fits in the framework and is a valid opinion, then you can't jump on people that disagree with you.
Exactly.
Not in the way that we see people doing today.
Absolutely. And look at this comment here by Knowledge North, our brother from Knowledge North. We're going to have him on the show as well, by the way.
I'm looking forward to that.
yeah, that's going to be a good one. He says it's a very important point here. Ibn Taymiyyah recognized the scholarship of all those non-Sunni scholars who had even incarcerated him. So
exactly.
He recognizes that the scholarship of if somebody who is a scholar, just because even if we don't agree with them, and he refused to have them punished due to the benefit they could bring to the common people despite the errant stances.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you were mentioning just before, right?
Exactly.
So that just echoes exactly what you were mentioning earlier. Yeah, he's one of our balanced brothers, right? The one that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, you guys should check out his YouTube channel. It's amazing.
Yeah, you must check out the YouTube channel. There's two links you got to check out from today's podcast, guys. Yeah, one is Knowledge North, which you just saw there, and the second one is Rasheed Gonzales blog post. Yeah, Blogspot. What's the link? It's WordPress.
It's RasheedGonzales.wordpress.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I mean, if you Google my name, you'll find it. It's easy.
Yeah, you'll find it. You have
just
to
ignore the posts on Salafi Talk.
Yeah, avoid them ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's a good way to finish off the podcast, bro. I think it was a good, insightful discussion.
There it is.
Jazakallah khair for joining us. I don't think there's any
Jazakallah khair for having me.
It was good catching up, man. It was
good seeing you. Good hearing
a long
from
time
you.
coming. Yeah.
Yeah, man. We should do it again sometime.
Definitely. Maybe we'll get both you and Abdurrahman on together at some
Ooh.
point. That'll be good.
Inshallah.
Let's really stir the pot, yeah, when with you two on it, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakumullah
All right. We're gonna wrap it up there, guys. We'll be back tomorrow, inshallah. So make sure you tune in tomorrow midnight and Sunday midnight. We're going to be talking about, well, Islam, fitness, health, combat sports. We've got it all happening, inshallah, over this weekend. Saturday and Sunday, we'll be back same time, inshallah. So on that note, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khairan.